Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is words number 31. Danny is with me. And well, we sort of know, but don't know what we're going to talk about. But we're going to do an after show today. So make sure that you stay tuned and go over to my Patreon or her Patreon. It'll be in both places so that you can hear the after show, because the after show is planned, but the regular show isn't. So
right.
How you doing, Danny?
I know what we're talking about for the after show. I have no idea otherwise.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
What's going on there in Santa Fe?
What is going on in Santa Fe? I got an email yesterday from my improv school saying that in-person classes will not start until there is a COVID vaccine. So.
That's funny.
So funny. Oh my God, it's so funny.
Right, that's the improv, right? Like yeah. You should have been like, this is a comedy workshop. Is this a joke?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so no more funnies until we have a vaccine.
No more funnies till there's a vaccine. And when you said this was our 31st show, I always associate the number 31 to Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, because the main character turns 31 in the book and she keeps calling it a viable, diable age. So this is our viable, diable show.
Well, we can't seem to entice any guests, so maybe this is either, but somebody seems to think we're like the new Diamond and Silk, so we're about to become viable or diable. I like it.
But at least the most recent guests we approached had the courtesy to message us back to say no. So yeah. I feel like it's progress.
Yeah, and I still think we have a yes from Cynthia, but I don't think her email doesn't work, and I don't know if she recognizes me on Skype, because I don't know why she would told me to contact her there if she wouldn't do it. So one day we'll have Cynthia McKinney, that we maybe know sort of for sure, but other than that, everyone else doesn't respond. Yeah, except for we actually got a response from Biggie, but we're still working on it, so we're going to leave that alone.
Yeah, we're not taking that no seriously.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Danny, I wasn't aware of the fact that Danny is an engineer. I know she has lots of things, but she informed me the other day that she's an engineer and she's working to engineer the no into a yes. So
on it, totally on it.
Are you a social engineer?
Sure.
that's my favorite kind, right? So yeah. I mean, I was conceived at Tavistock, so I might be a social engineer. But what about you?
Conceived at Tavistock?
Basically, my mom was working for SciCon, which I believe it's hard to trace exactly what SciCon is, but don't you just love that name anyway?
No.
It's spelled like science as a con. Like SCICON, SciCon. But the address was in Tavistock Square, right? The address is in Tavistock Square, and a lot of times I was finding notes, her like requesting documents from like other people in the company and addressing them to like people at Tavistock, you know what I mean? So there was definitely she has things requesting documents from the World Health Organization, from Tavistock, from whatever. So it's definitely some sort of SciCon, right? But
you were engineered before birth. Like they were fucking with your soul before you made it into your mama's womb.
Well, this is my mom was working there when she got pregnant with me, and then they were living in London, and they moved back here before I was born.
Meaning until they impregnated her with you.
And then was probably told to go and you plop it out at Cedars of Lebanon. Do you know something? Can I tell you the weird? We know lots of weird things about Cedars of Lebanon, right? But you know what the weirdest thing is?
That it's the Scientology Center?
No, this is way weirder, but this tells me that it's important, right? Like that it's got a very important place in why things are done the way they're done. Do I know what it's? So when you use like AstroDeist or Cafe Astrology or any of those things to do a chart, like when I look up Los Angeles as a location, there's
Lebanon is an actual
Lebanon is an actual place that you can use as a location of birth.
What?
Mm-hmm.
That's so crazy.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Now, whenever I get a reading or any kind of astrological or tarot or numerology kind of chart or anything like that from anybody, I let them know. I put on there Los Angeles, California, Cedars of Lebanon. The reason I'm saying this is because it is listed on AstroDeist as an actual astrological location.
That's so weird because it doesn't even exist anymore because it burned down. That whole area, though, because you have like Cedars of Lebanon, which is now the Scientology Center. Then you have Scientology Celebrity Center, only like less than 2 miles away. Then you have the Krishnamurti Center. Then you have the Annie Besant Lodge. Then you have Vedanta. They're all in that same area. There's got to be something about like geomancy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some geomancy things going on, but according to a lot of things that I've read, the Circle of Nine used to meet on that block. The Council of Nine or the Circle of Nine. I don't know what the exact, like it was a very hot spot.
What's the Council of Nine?
In the mid-1900s.
But what is that?
So it's an occult,
Crowley thing?
ritual kind of thing. There's many explanations for it. Sometimes I hear it called the Circle of Nine. Sometimes the Council of Nine. It seems to be somewhat related to intelligence agencies, somewhat related to secret societies, somewhat related to like Thelema kinds of ideas, right? Like your Jack Parsons kind of.
Because there are also so many people like Magenta Pixie and Phil Good who channel the Nine.
Right. So there's some, it's like one of these very debated things about, is it a good, it's like Metatron's cube. Some people think Metatron's cube is like the evil shape. Some think it's or evil geometry. Some think it's the magical geometry. The truth is it's probably just geometry, but there's something about its possibilities that it's easy to use and you can use it multiple ways for doing things, right? So it's just like anything else. There's probably like Freemasons that are good and Freemasons that are bad, and they probably learned the same, right? So it's like, it's a system, or like a system or a group, an idea that came out of a group that is very viable for use in sort of underhanded intelligence operations. But even if that isn't necessarily its I don't know. I'm not sure.
Have you talked to Robert Phoenix about Cedars of Lebanon?
I mean, he knows I was born there, but I don't know that we've had a conversation about the fact that that shows up on the Astro Needs chart. I should probably have a conversation with him about.
Do any other hospitals show up on Astro Needs? I've never seen that before.
I just noticed when I was typing in Los Angeles, under Los Angeles, there was choices of Cedars Sinai, Cedars of Lebanon. There was not like Northridge Hospital or anything like that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Weird.
But yeah, so I mean, I don't know if it's because those are two places that are highly correlated with celebrities being born and dying. So that could be, right? So that's why that might be the cover reason.
I don't think celebrities are born in, like, no one's born in LA, like not famous people, they just come there, right? But I wouldn't imagine that many celebrities were born in.
I think in older days there were more.
Oh, okay, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. How did we get started on this? Oh yeah. So Tavistock. So right. So she got transferred from Tavistock to Cedars of Lebanon, right? But what's crazy is this. So I've been doing all this work lately on this symbolism of this 4-lobe shape and all the possibilities for perforating the walls of the universe with this, right? When my mom moved here, she immediately went to go work for ARCO, Atlantic Richfield. This symbol, their ARCO symbol is the inverse of the symbol in a different way than the Knights Templar crosses. So there's different ways you can sort of move the parts of the symbol around. But the symbol for ARCO, which is where my mom worked when she transferred, is the inverse of this symbol, right? So I was like, this is fucking weird, dude.
Such a trip.
It's such a trip. But yeah, so I do, but a lot of people who I've talked to about my parents and the things that have gone on, like a lot of people say that like UCLA was a really big place for like putting, my dad and my mom were fixed up on a date, right? And so like, I think, so like when I talked to Andrew Bashago, right? Like he also went to UCLA and he grew up in Chatsworth, very close to where I grew up. And he talked about how Chatsworth was intended to be a place where they were putting together families that one of the parents were in education and one was in technology, right? And so in Atlantic Richfield, even though it's thought of as an oil company, there's also a lot of energy patents that are associated with that for various kinds of technologies related to extracting energy from things.
Right.
So there's that. And my dad was working at Pierce College and my mom was working at ARCO, right? And the people who live next door to us, I can't, like the wife worked at Lytton. I'm not super clear on what the husband was doing, right? But everybody, like there was a lot of that kind of stuff where one of the parents worked at a school of some sort and the other seemed to have a job in some kind of like technology kind of thing, right? So that's kind of interesting.
Has anyone written about this pattern, this mating pattern that appeared in Chatsworth?
Well, I don't know that there's, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with the whole Chatsworth thing. The more that there's a huge connection between Chatsworth and like Dave McGowan's work because of, what's his name? The crazy motherfucker.
Manson?
Yeah, Charles Manson, right? Because of the Manson Tunnel being in Chatsworth and Spawn Ranch being in Chatsworth and whatnot. So there's
I took sovereignty classes at Spawn Ranch.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that. That's fucking fascinating, right? You know that there's so many weird. The Chatsworth thing just gets weirder and weirder. But the whole thing with Chatsworth, like I've told you, is that there's a place in England called Chatsworth House that's in the town of Devonshire, right? And so Chatsworth, California, is at the corner. The center of Chatsworth is at the corner of Devonshire and Mason.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like some weird ley line kind of. I don't know exactly what.
And you know that Devon is a city that stood up to 5G, and it wasn't through legal channels, but Devon itself was like, no, you're not putting this here, which I think is interesting as far as like whatever with LA being sort of ground zero for smart cities and Chatsworth specifically, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, like all their weird shit, and then its sister city is like a free healthy zone.
Mm-hmm. The other, you know what the name of the street is? Like right there where Spawn Ranch is?
No.
Too? Schumann, like Schumann Resonance.
Oh, that's right.
Right there at Manor Lake, right there. And so Jeff and I noticed this when we were there. And it's like, I think part of how they do all this crap with like time stopping and time freezing is by like something is going on there technology wise, where they're vibrating a certain, like maybe it's a Schumann resonance or another, and then they're bringing people, things, areas of the location into that same resonance, which stops time. Thank you very much, Richard Rodzinskis, for explaining that when your harmonic, your frequency is exactly in sync with the Schumann resonance, it stops time.
You know, Richard Rudd lives in Devon. Just saying.
You're kidding me, really?
Swear to God.
That's fucking fascinating, dude. But, so if it's true for that resonance, it's probably true for other frequencies too, right? Like maybe it's unique to that one, I don't know. But the amount of time anomalies that I had there and that I've heard other people report tells me that there's a zone or an area there that when you go into it, if you are able to resonate with whatever that is vibrating, then it's just time's off the table, right?
Interesting. Okay.
And maybe it's this area between Schumann and something else, right? They're sort of, they do things like this so that the people know, you know what I mean? It's in your, like it's there. There are no secrets. They've told us everything. We just don't understand what they're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, so basically I've talked to a number of people, and like, this is something that is like part of the purpose of like UCLA and some of these schools is not just the programming that they do to indoctrinate people, but also the matching and pairing. Think about most, at least maybe not so much now, but still a lot. But certainly in our parents' time, most people met their sweetheart either in high school or college. And they often went to the same college, right? And so, my dad and my mom are incredibly different. Like my dad is Jewish, my mom is not. She's Goya, she likes Jewish men and whatever, but right? But like my mom was very into like economics and mathematics and like all that kind of stuff. And my dad was very into like history and, law and, that kind of different stuff. But if you're trying to like create let's say you want children with a certain profile, and that's the ability to be like analytical and creative in their thinking at the same time, then that's a good match, right? Especially with certain kinds of genetics, right? So it's an interesting idea. UCLA is definitely super heavily involved, in mind control kind of stuff based on lots of the people that have been the head of the.
Wasn't that psych ward was there that now suddenly there's no record of?
Yeah, the psych ward is there. Lots of the MK Ultra doctors, I think, even including you and Cameron, have worked at. Is it you and Cameron or one of the others? Worked at the Neuropsychiatric Institute there. So there's a big. I mean, it's a huge. It's a huge center of like the cultural diversity kind of operations. Just lots of, I mean, I can go get really deep with a lot of the things that I think are going on there. It gets into race and gender and all sorts of, different kinds of things. But, UCLA is definitely a huge player in the social operation governing this country.
Do you think more so than the other UC schools, or is it all coming through the
different
UC
stuff in different places, right? So
Yeah.
like obviously there's something particular going on at like Stanford, which is not a UC school, but that's obviously everyone knows about that connection to mind control. But here's the funny part. My mom, those are the two schools she applied to. Her parents wanted her to go to Stanford and were very upset when she chose to go to UCLA, but she really wanted to go to UCLA. So while she escaped her parents' planned mind control for her, she ended up in the hands of just the other, right, kind of thing. She said her dad used to call UCLA the Little Red Schoolhouse, right, because they just created communists there. So he was right on a certain level, but right, So, those were the two schools, though, that she was deciding between. Obviously, there's something going on at Berkeley, right? You think less, you're not as inclined to think about something going on at Santa Barbara or Davis or San Diego or whatever, but things go on there too. Think about how much Davis is involved both in agriculture and then its proximity to things like Livermore Laboratories and all of the sort of Silicon Valley kind of stuff. Like that's not, people think of like Stanford with that and Berkeley with that, but Davis isn't that as far away as people think it is from there, right? And then, like there, Santa Barbara, like, and that's where my sister got some of her stuff going. That's where you got some of your stuff going. And you were definitely set off down that track. I mean, you diverged, right? But you were set off down a similar kind of track of like, very leftist, globalist kind of thinking, right? Like that was sort of the purpose of that space. It's also, we had the Elliot Rodgers shooting there, right? So Santa Barbara's that. Irvine is period a weird place, and so UC Irvine also is a weird place, and there's people who talk about the various mind control stuff that goes on in Irvine. So I think that it's a lot, and it's a lot of universities. It's not just here in California. It's just that we have a high density, just like Massachusetts, we have a high density of high-end universities here that are well-funded both publicly and privately.
Yeah.
And, so, yeah. So I think that there's a lot of matchmaking going on at UCLA, probably.
It's interesting that you're saying this because I don't know if I told you, but I did a podcast a couple weeks ago with this awesome woman, Sarah Lees, and her dad was like a high-level engineer for the Navy. And she grew up on some base, and they targeted her mother based on genetics and karma. This is her story. Her soul was allegedly in storage at Los Alamos in some sort of basement soul bank. And her story is that they completely went after her mother because of her genetics, because of their karma. And like, I mean, matchmaking is such a weird term for it. We've got to come up with a different term. But they engineered her birth there. And she has conscious memories of MK and some genetic genome project.
The Human Genome Project is so there's two things that are huge parts of like the modern mind control stuff that they call other stuff when they're trying to get funding and make it sound okay to the public. And that's the brain mapping program, which is also the same thing as the secret space program. And then there's the Human Genome Project, which is basically gene therapy that like I've talked about that like with Nish and whatever. So no, I think there's a lot of that stuff going on. I think my parents were destined for the combination, right? Like I think that was something that was, projected and planned and this stuff with the children. I think this is right. So I think they're trying to create bodies that can hold the frequency of certain spirits or souls. And I think they hold those spirits and souls up for being born at certain times. Like I have I'm just going to get into one of my crazy old things here, but like I have no proof for this, but my little knower that knows a lot of stuff, those storage facilities that are called life storage. Have you seen them? I was driving home from work one day and it caught at the corner of the eye. I'm like, oh, this is where they're keeping the cryogenically frozen children, that are these bodies that are storing things. Because I think you have to store the soul in something. I don't think it can be just like sitting on a hard drive yet. I think that's coming about now. I mean, it's probably already happening, but I don't think that it's the same as when they're keeping it in stasis in a body or whatever. I don't know. But I have a feeling that think about how many storage facilities there are everywhere. There's a lot of storage facilities, and a lot of them boast about being climate controlled, right? Or you know, and they can do so. When I see this life storage place, for some reason, this particular one, like everything in me knows that that shit is full of clones or full of like bodies that are just waiting in stasis kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is true, but in my mind, this is like what I pick up every time I drive by it. I drove by it for the first time in a long time the other day because I don't work where I was working anymore. It was like same feeling, you know? So yeah, no, there's definitely stuff to that, right? Like I think I was held back from being born. I was 2 weeks late, right? So I think that like if you read, and there's no one's work out there that's 100% perfect, but if you read some of the Fritz Springmeier stuff, when he talks about the creation of a moon child, he talked about holding back births so that people are born on a certain day or date. And of course, I am a Cancer with a moon in Pisces, right? So if you're trying to create a quote unquote moon child, right, then that would be the date.
I mean, I know you're a Cancer with a moon in Pisces. It's just so different.
What like if you were just,
I know it in relating to you. I feel it.
If you were just from your initial thoughts to make up an astrological profile for what you would have thought I was, what would it have been?
I would think that you are Aries, Sag, Leo, but there's also a lot of capability in you that could be Capricorn, but you're not like a controlling know-it-all. So, but yeah, I would put you at something fun, or maybe even like a Taurus.
Interesting. Yeah. So I don't know. The astrological language is challenging for me. So I don't know all my little various thises and that's, but like the main stuff, like I'm Cancer, Gemini rising, moon in Pisces. My Venus is in Leo.
That makes sense. You've got to have, your Mercury's got to be in an air sign.
I don't know. So I don't have a lot of earth in my chart. It's mostly like fire and water and other stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anywho. All right. So that's, but back to, was it engineered? Like was the relationship engineered? Was my birth engineered? I mean, I don't know. It certainly matches up to all the stories that are told about that kind of thing. My parents certainly think they were living an organic life in London, but I don't know how organic can be when my dad was at the University of London School of African and Oriental Studies, which is the main player implicated in all of the crazy art in the pedophile art collections of these people. And my mom was working for SciCon thinking she was doing oil studies in Iraq, but all the papers I can find that she wrote are about drug dependency and how it can be used to manipulate society. So you tell me.
But I think everyone thinks they're living an organic life. I think 99.99999% of people think they're living an organic life. We haven't been presented with other, like in all of our mythology and all of our narratives and all the bullshit that they throw at us, they don't present that as an option. And no one thinks like, what kind of fucked up, architectured, like nefarious, multidimensional simulation am I living out? And if you do,
right,
the way we do, people think you're crazy.
Yeah. And they would be right, but not for the reason they think they are.
Exactly.
So I want to, speaking of living an organic life, I want to tell you a little bit about this trip that we just had. And then we can talk about a few other people who may or may not be living an organic life. So Laura and I went to, we went out of town to this, we made a reservation at this place, like, early in the coronavirus lockdown, all the hotels were like panicking. And so you could buy for later, like cheap nights at really nice places, right? So there's this new hotel out in the middle of the desert in Central California, like in the eastern part of Santa Barbara County kind of area, called Cuyama Buckhorn. It's in the little town is called New Cuyama, and this hotel is called Cuyama Buckhorn. And it's really cute. It's like, when you are on a road trip and you find those old towns, it has like those old kind of motels, like the one-story motel, like the drive-in kind of motel, and then they also have a coffee shop attached to it.
Yeah.
So they bought one of these old rundown places and like redid it like fucking adorable. It's so cute. Everything, it got all the little details right. They made it like an old, like mid-century meets like California West kind of, vibe, right? And you know, and fancy food and all that kind of, you know, nice food, and they have like music, and they have what's that, bocce ball and a pool table outside, and campfires, and stuff, and nice food and nice cocktails. So I was like, oh, that looks like a fun getaway. Like, you know, let's just buy these. It's a good deal for this. Let's go and do that and whatever. So we went, and like the first issue was that the tennis final was on Sunday. And so the tennis final was at 1:00. And we didn't want to watch here and then go, because we would then like check in. We wanted to have our full time that we could at the place. So it's like, we have to find some way between, I didn't think they had TVs there. It turned out they did have TVs in the room, but I didn't know, like, it sounded like they maybe wouldn't, and they didn't have in the bar or anything like that. So I'm like, we have to find a place between here and there where we can stop and that we can watch sports that isn't just sitting outside in 200-degree weather. So I find this bar in Taft. And I call on Friday to make sure that they'll let me watch tennis there, because sometimes in certain bars, it's like, no, you're just watching football, and that was it. So I called, and they said yes. And so on Sunday, we're going up there. This place is in Taft, right? And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I call, and on Friday, they say yes. So Sunday, we're heading up there. And as we're heading up there, we're talking to my dad on the phone. And my dad's like, you might want to call and make sure, because it's a pretty rednecky place, and they may not want to watch tennis in there. Right. I was like, I just don't want you to be disappointed, right? So we call and verify that, yes, they'll let me watch tennis. But he says, so he starts telling us, so my dad has a story for everything, that, you know, Taft used to have they used to have the best community college football team in the country, right? But it's kind of a rednecky town. Like my dad, it's okay for him to say redneck. It's like, you know, whatever.
Am I not allowed to say that anymore? Do I need to add that?
No, we're allowed to say that, but like, if someone said something about another group of people the other way, it would be considered racist. But my dad just says redneck offhand, right? I think it's okay to say everything, but right. Whatever. So it's funny how it works one way for him. So he's like, now they had the best community college football team in the country, but it's a very white rednecky area, and they were bringing in all of these black football players from like, you know, the South, and then they would go there for a couple of years, and then they'd go on to like the good football schools like Mississippi and whatever. He's like, and it was the weirdest thing, because the town, like there's, you know, it's white people there, but the football team was so successful, so they were proud of their football team, but there'd be these scuffles in town at bars when people got drunk that were like racially related. So he's going on and on about this story and whatever. So he had his story for that. But he's like, this should be an interesting experience. So we get there, and of course, on the way into town, we see this community college and whatever. And this is a rundown podunk town, right? Everything is super run down there. But we find this place. So this place that we went to was called the Bank. And it's a 100-year-old bank building, like one of those really cool brick buildings with the big arched windows and stuff. And we get there, and we notice that there's people sitting outside. So we're like, shit, you're allowed to go inside, aren't you? They told me you could on there. But we go up to the door, and it says, masks for ugly people only. Yes! We go in there. No one's wearing a mask, right? And maybe I should, well, hopefully it's okay that I say that. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But everyone who works there is a fucking conspiracy. Everyone who works there is a conspiracy theorist. Right? The girl,
you're right at home.
And there's like a crazy chick who's like, we're talking to her for like 30 seconds, and she's like, yeah, she basically comes out as a conspiracy theorist. We hadn't even said anything conspiratorial yet, right? And then the owner comes over and talks to us, and everyone is like, yeah, this shit is bullshit, and like we ended up in like,
I thought I'm moving to Taft.
A text saying, I'm moving here. He's like, why? I'm like, because only ugly people wear masks here. He's like, well, now you're going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks before I'll see you. Right? But we end up in this place. They let me watch tennis. The food is reasonable. You know, the drinks are shitty and whatever, but everyone there is a character. There's no background people there. Everyone there is fucking weird as fuck and bizarre. And Laura's had a few drinks, and she's going around asking, like, talking about Tartaria with the local Vietnam vets. Right? It was pretty funny. But it was just kind of interesting to be in a place where, like, for them, this shit doesn't exist. Right? So it was like, I had that moment of like, maybe we should move to town. Right? So that was interesting. So then we'll finish the tennis, and we go about half hour away, 35 minutes away is our place. And we get there. There's like nothing else in this town. There's this place. There's something called the Burger Barn that's not open, and then there's like a liquor store and a laundromat not open, right? So we get there, and it's like super cute, right? And we're the first night, it's just us and one other person in the hotel. And they have a restaurant there, but because of the lockdown, they're only open from 11 to 3. If you're staying in the hotel, they'll cook you dinner and bring it to you, like out at the picnic tables or whatever. You know, they have cocktails. They'll bring you whatever you want, right? Kind of thing. So the other woman was like hiding in her room. So we have the whole place to ourselves, right? So we're like eating our dinner at the campfire. It was like fun. We're enjoying it. You know, the food was good. And then the next morning, like I wake up and I go over to the little store to get some Advil, right? Because Laura had a headache. And it felt really eerie. I felt like I was the only person in this whole town. Everything, like even though the places that were at this area where the liquor store was, there was like a laundromat and something else, they didn't look like abandoned, like dilapidated, but they looked closed and like no one had been there in a long time, right? So I go around the front to this liquor store. I'm like, this shit is closed, dude. I'm not gonna be able to get any Advil. But I just was like, I'm just gonna pull in the door anyway. And like I open the door and it's like dark in there, but there's a guy there. And it's like the weirdest little store ever inside, but he's super nice, you know, like, and maybe he's from like somewhere in the Eastern Europe or whatever, right? I get the Advil, but I'm like, it almost felt like there was no other people in the world except for me. And that liquor store experience only happened because it was, I needed it too, right? Like I created the liquor store so I could go in there and get the Advil. It was like, I was the only one alive, like the world hadn't been turned on yet, right? Like it was very weird and eerie. And I just like, it put in a weird feeling in my stomach and I was like kind of creeped out for the first half of the day. Like it literally felt like the world had ended and we were the only ones left alive, but like there was still like food and things to do and things would show up as we needed them, right? But there was no, it didn't feel like there was anybody else in the world. And you know, the sky is all smoky and the sun is the very orange hue because of that and whatever. And it was just like, it was almost that feeling of like, well, it would be like if you were the only person left in the world or you had one other person that you were with, right? It was so strange. I've only had one other experience like that. And that was when Jeff and I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we got there and it was like somebody had forgotten to like cue the set. So it was like we were walking around on a set where there was like nothing was turned on and everything. It was like a movie set that wasn't functional, right? This was kind of like that, but out in the middle of nowhere, right? It took me till about 2 o'clock in an energy session with Chris Kaler to come out of this funk that this created for me, because I was like, I had this sense of impending doom. It was so strange, right? So it was cool. We hung out. We had a great time there. Like it was a very cute place. I recommend people go and check it out. They did everything perfect. And the food is good and the drinks are good and all that. It'd be more fun to go there with a group of people because there isn't really much else there.
Well, since I'm moving there, I'll meet you there next time.
Oh, you're moving there?
I'm moving to Taft. But wait, as you're describing it, it feels like a hologram that your simulation gifted you. Because when you're describing the restaurant and all the people, I'm like, no, the multiverse gave you guys this gift, but I don't think it exists. It's your own personal little perfect vacation.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And it was kind of like situations would come up. The second night, we were the only ones there, right? So like situations would come up where it's like, shit, I'm not going to be able to get what I need. But everything we like asked for or tried to do, we could get. The only part that was weird is there's nothing else there to do, right? So once you've eaten for dinner and lunch the things you want to eat at the restaurant, then you need someplace else to eat, but there's no place else to go.
Right.
The nearest, like, we didn't want to go back to Taft because there was nothing really good to eat there. So the nearest place to get anything good to eat is like over an hour away. So we decided we'd venture out anyway, and we went to Santa Ynez.
Okay.
Okay. And this was a beautiful drive there. We drove through like cattle, hilly kind of country in California, right, out to the Pacific Coast Highway, to 101 at Santa Maria, and then down to Santa Ynez. And we get to Santa Ynez, and it's like very beautiful, rolling hills, horse property kind of stuff, right? And we pull into the little town, and it's like, I don't know, it's like maybe there's like 3,000 people that live there or something, but it's like super like cute and fancy and high, you know, high end and whatever. And we had found this really great restaurant there. And we go in and like they're playing the mask game a little bit at the front, but we realized as we were in there that like you don't really have to. So like we stop, like you know, most places you have to wear it to walk in the front or whatever, take it off your table. We noticed other people coming and going without their masks, so we started doing that and nobody said anything. And it was like, we had a really nice dinner. The food was really good. It was called SY Kitchen, if anyone's in the area there. The food was delicious. But this is the kind of little town that it's like, oh, maybe this would be a good place to go and sort of wait out all this craziness, right? Because the Kuyama is a little too desolate, but this was like, there's like a few little restaurants, but everything is nice. It's like, if you were to have only 4 restaurants in town, these are the 4 you would want, like not some crappy shit, right?
Yeah.
And there's like nice big property. We were like, oh, like this might be a good place to wait. Like it didn't feel like all of it, except for the fact that the waiter was wearing a mask, right? But no one was making you do anything, right? And there was no weirdness in the right? Like it was just, if you didn't feel, when you were in the dining room, there was no one else wearing a mask, you know what I mean? Like it felt sort of normal. And it was like, okay, this is the kind of place, like the protesters are definitely not coming here. The 5G is not coming here because everyone's horse property that they're going to fight for if somebody tried to do that kind of shit, right? Like this might be the kind of place that you sort of want to like, you know, wait this crap out. You know what I mean? Because I do think a lot of the stuff will pass. And it was kind of it was so nice. It was like we had a little reprieve from. It was just really cool. And then we drove back, and then when we left yesterday, we were going to visit my mom in Ventura, so we took the 33. And I was expecting like a flat desert drive the whole way, but apparently there's this really crazy hilly mountainy forest in between New Kuyama and Ojai. I got car sick. It was that windy, the roads, but it's beautiful back there. And there is no reception anywhere for like an hour. I could not believe that this level of wilderness existed, this level of natural wilderness, not like plowed flat farmland like you see on the up to 5 or whatever. Like just, this looked like Yosemite, but it halfway between the desert and the ocean. In lower central California, like I was like, this is, I've never been, I had somehow, in all my life living here, had never been to this area in there. And while it made me car sick, it was also nice to know that was there.
Yeah.
Like it was kind of interesting. And then we came in Ojai from the back end. Like, you know, look, I've always entered Ojai from like Ventura. Yeah. Right. So it was like coming through a different way. And it was just kind of like, wow, I had a completely different experience of California than I had ever had in my life.
That's so cool.
Very rarely in California do you feel like you're the only one who exists. Like on a lot of these roads, like yesterday, most of the drive, we didn't see any other cars anywhere. And it wasn't like spotty reception. It was like for 1 hour, there was solid no kind of reception at all. That's like almost unheard of in California.
That's nice.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. It was kind of cool.
Interesting.
So everybody go on some weird, create a holographic space that exists just for you and your weekend getaway.
So here are the things that are coming to mind as you're sharing this. One is when you had asked at the beginning what's going on in Santa Fe, for the past week and a half, I've been really brave and gone to places that I haven't been going at all, never wearing a mask. No one has said anything to me, and everyone's been really friendly. So that's been my experience here. But the other piece was when you were saying the place to ride it out. And this might move us into our next thing, or it might move us into our Patreon or whatnot, but I'm noticing how many people are choosing to leave California to move to Austin. And I find it such an odd place to go because there is 5G. They are part of Agenda 21. There is Antifa. There is BLM. So it's just an odd choice given how many people I know that are choosing Austin. What's your take on Austin?
Well, I mean, obviously I've lived in Austin several times. I still have quite a few friends in Austin. I will be there in a couple of weeks for a few days and whatnot. Austin is an interesting place. You've never been, that's right. You've never been. We talked about going, but you've never been. Okay, so there's an obvious attraction and romance about the place. There's something very cool about it. I first went there, I think I had my first visit there in like 1997 or 98. A family that I used to babysit for here, they moved there because the father took a job as the president of Guiltless Gourmet. Remember the original like healthy chips? Yep. And they were located there. And so I would go visit them. And then I had one visit there to see them where I ended up one night going out to a concert while I was there. I went to like go see Crystal Method and Fatboy Slim, right? And like here, when you go see Crystal Method and Fatboy Slim, it depends, like if you go see it, where you go see it, whether you get like a regular concert or something that's more akin to like a rave or a dance party, right? Depends on where they're playing. So I went to the Austin City Music Hall thinking I was going to get something that was kind of like the Greek Theater or something here, I don't know, or whatever, but it wasn't. It was like this place where I found out later they also have like all the raves and stuff in Austin back in the 90s. And so I went there, it was like a huge party, right? And I like met all these really cool people. Like I didn't know anybody. I was there by myself. I met cool people. It was totally fun. I ended up at an after party, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, maybe I want to move here. This place is cool. I don't know why. It was just like, this place is cool. So I applied to University of Texas, and I get in because I was looking to go back to school. I found a job coaching in a gym there, and off I was. I moved there, right? And so that was like interesting. You know, that was kind of how I ended up there. But I always liked, even before I decided to move there, they do restaurants and grocery shopping and like parks and all the things that like you like for your day-to-day life. They do that incredibly well there, right? Like everything, like the grocery stores are much better than the ones here. Like the restaurants are kind of cool. Like there's just a lot of neat stuff, right? Like it's a neat, and at that time it was still a fairly small city. This was like in the late 90s. And then there's this musical history, which is very much like New Orleans or Memphis or whatever else in its musical history, a little bit more edgy maybe than those places, you know, in that sense. So I moved there, and like people are nice there. It's cool. It's easy
Texas
to make.
has the nicest people. Anytime I've never met someone from Texas who's not super nice.
Yeah, it was very easy. I had made more friends the first month I lived there than I had made my whole life living in Los Angeles. Especially if you're just like wanting to hang out and party and have a good time. Now, my experience with friends later, when I was having a really difficult time in life and I needed a different kind of friend, was a little shakier, right? I have some friends that over time have proven things have evened out, and they've proven to be excellent friends. But some people that I thought I could count on, I couldn't. And that's for anywhere. But, you know, so people are really nice, and there's just like a lot of fun, cool stuff to do there. It's fun. And so I think there's a natural draw there for creative people, for people who like are very social, right? And it's a great place to socially engineer. It's not it's not unlike certain parts of Los Angeles or probably certain parts of London or whatever, where it just attracts a certain combination of people who are interested in forward-thinking things, whether that be technology or some kind of social progress, whether that be through a counterculture like a dance music movement, or whether that be a political kind of social progress, you know, whatever it is, right? Like these couple of things come together. And I think one of the things that made Austin really unique, it was a place where people from the far left and the far right could agree on some things. And so for a long time that held Austin in this really cool space that was sort of outside of the influence of that the rest of the country. Like everybody in Austin, I noticed, like the people on the far right and the people on the far left back there in like the late 90s, they were all very interested in the source of their food, right? And so that's part of why there were all these really good markets. It was easy to get things like raw milk there. Like there was always lots of artisan coffee roasters and cream makers and goat cheese ice cream, and always, even before it became a really trendy thing here 10 years later because of places like Erewhon or whatever, right? That was always going on there. Like I could find cool stuff there in some ways before I could find it here, right? Mm-hmm. So the political parties seemed to agree on a lot of that stuff. And so there was an idea that we all want freedom, if for no other reason than to control our own bodies. Yep. In terms of what we put in them. And it seemed like both sides were interested in health and medical freedom, even if they didn't agree on the social stuff. Yeah. So at some point that, you know, during the time I lived there, you got a lot of like Dell and Apple coming there, and the music festivals like South by Southwest and Austin City Limits and whatever grew from something smaller into these really worldwide kinds of things. So then you're starting to have the influences of a lot of people that are not native Texans and that didn't necessarily come to Austin originally for the freedom, but they noticed other people did. And so that was a good chance to sort of steer society from a different angle. Like obviously like the jig is up and they know that society is steered from Los Angeles, Washington, and New York in the United States. Like they needed a third place, you know, they needed a place that seemed outside of that. You know, and there's a couple of, you know, we had that with Seattle in the 90s with the grunge music scene a little bit, right? We felt that influence before. You know, and sometimes, you know, so this was like maybe the next one of the, you know, like Austin was like the next, you know, it's very similar to Los Angeles climate-wise. So you can appeal to Hollywood, you can appeal to certain kinds of people. There's a combination of cultural and outdoors kinds of activities. So I think, and also it's because of the way it's set up, I think it's one of the best cities for creating like an enclosed system, like a megalopolis. And I think that is what's going to happen there. And I think that like once so it's the first place that I ever noticed when I was there visiting in like 2000. So I lived there on and off from 1999 to 2003. And then I lived there for a summer in 2006 again, and then again for about 6 or 8 months in 2008 or 9. And I've always visited fairly frequently. When I was back there for that summer in 2005, 2006, it was after my brother had died and I had started to wake up. Like my heavy wake up stuff came in like that 2004 to 2006 period. And that summer was where I really started first looking deeply into 9/11. Like I had a birthday party while I was there at a nightclub. Like we threw a party and a friend came. I went home with a friend that I had, that was at the party, and he showed me the Loose Change 9/11 documentary. That night, like in the middle of the night, and or first thing at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it really, because of some other things I had learned in the previous year, it really started my mind moving in a different direction. Thank you, Jason Thomas, for the wake up. Prince Valium. Anyway, so I started seeing everything through a different, like I already knew about like things like the Dark Alliance and the CIA bringing the crack into South Central and how it was related to the foreign policy and all that kind of stuff. And I already knew about like some aspects of some stuff with the chemtrails. And I had started looking more into mind control because something had come up in a class I had taken. And I knew that the way that she was, somehow I instinctively knew that the way MK Ultra was being described to me was not what it actually was. It was like the code for it. So I started looking into that stuff, but I hadn't really gotten into like the false flaggy kind of shit yet, right? So I started doing that, but I was thinking about possibly moving there permanently. And I saw an ad for an apartment complex or an experimental apartment area on a certain area of town where rent would either be free or very cheap if you agreed to have all of your activities monitored. And I didn't take that at that time as surveillance, although it may have been. What it was like that they were going to really be keeping track of the way you used your energy or electricity and whatever, right? Maybe they were trying to study green, whatever. It sounded like there was a part of it that appealed to me because I didn't have much money at that point. I was struggling a lot. But there was something about, I was like, there's something that I find disturbing about this. And it's now the area of town where there's like this weird planned community that seems to be all about creating that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, I had never seen anything like that in Los Angeles. So I started shifting my opinion about it. So I ended up coming back home and then moving back to Austin for a bit in 2008, 2009. And I just noticed how really technology had really come to wrestle away control of the city from the more artistic bunch. And then the fusion of art and technology, which in some ways is not necessarily a bad thing, but the whole place had really made the full shift from analog to digital, right? It didn't really work for me, and I kind of left. And then it was during that period of time, the time when I first moved there in 1999 to that time when I left for the last time in 2008, where like the famous people started moving there a lot, and a lot of these other companies started moving their headquarters there. And I just, it just became like a different kind of place. And it turned in, now when you go there, it feels like it's South by Southwest every day. Like I call it South by Southwest summer camp. It's like every day is South by Southwest, right? People walking around with their backpacks on and their wrist bracelets and, whatever. So I don't know, I think that there's been social engineering going on there for a long time. I think the Austin Access Television simultaneously had Bill Hicks, Alex Jones, and Freeman on. Right, on their channel. So I think that there's been trying to.
Did Alex Jones live there?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There was a period of time in the late 90s where Hicks, Jones, and Freeman were all sort of intersecting. Maybe Freeman came along a little later, but they were all in that same building filming their stuff. Yeah. Right. So that's so that's interesting. So Alex Jones, there's a lot of alternative media really sprung out of Austin, Texas.
That's interesting. It's also a lot of human potential dudes like Tim Ferriss, Aubrey Marcus.
Yeah.
Rogan just moved there. Andrew Wakefield's there, so you've got that medical freedom piece.
Del Bigtree is there. So Joe Rogan, but I think the Aubrey Marcus piece is really interesting, and a part that goes not is what JP Sears is there. So a lot of people who are in on the conversation in this borderline.
Is Jason Silva there? I don't know why I think that.
He's in that, but like he might be in that same group of people. He's definitely partly that. So the people that are sort of like this is where like intelligence agencies really, they're that strip of people who walk the line between fringe and mainstream, right? They have this area in between. And I can't remember when we did the show about Austin, Robert and I, there had been some looking into Aubrey Marcus's father has a very interesting background. And then
the flashlight.
Right, but like Aubrey Marcus is interesting. The On It stuff is interesting. The whole like culture that they've created around the sort of ketogenic lifestyle, right? And the kettlebells and the roping and the working out and the nootropics and whatnot. Like there's a whole. It's like a cult. It's like a Fight Club kind of thing, right? Like it's like they create. And so I think that Austin is super technologically integrated. There's a lot of 5G there. It's not a huge city, so it's sort of easy to sort of put, I think it's going to be one of the first places where we see that you have to, you're going to see social credit scores going into how you can move in and out of that space type of thing. I think what's happening, all these wealthy people that live there, right? They all have probably farms on the edge of town, right? So they're not going to be living in that thing, right? And they're going to have their businesses in there. So they're going to be coming and going, right? So they're going to be living in a certain kind of freedom that the people who are part of their cult are not.
Interesting.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of social engineering going on there. I think there's a lot of experimentation with, smart stuff, smartness, and ways of integrating brain entrainment in certain zones of town, different kinds of stuff.
Notice how we didn't mention any women who I only know of the famous dudes who live there.
Yeah, it's definitely a bromance kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. Sandra Bullock lives there. She lived there pretty early on. She has a film company there and a restaurant. I think her restaurant may have closed recently, though. Okay. She was the big female celebrity that lived there. She was next to me dancing at a drum and bass party.
Have you had any inclination to move there?
If there's still stuff there that I really like, there's amazing bars and restaurants and cool stuff there, and I still have a lot of friends there. But it's one of those, it's a place that's not Los Angeles that meets my requirements for a lot of things, but I'm very well aware of this other thing. And so I don't want to move from, if I'm going to relocate, it has to be at least 20 to 25% more freedom for me. It can't just be a 5% upgrade in freedom, right? So, and I'm not even convinced that there's more freedom in Austin. I think there's more freedom in Texas, but not necessarily Austin. But so I think that Austin is, people are seeing, oh my God, all these people are saying it's free and fun there, but all people that are saying that have a lot of money, right? So I think in the early stages of the control of society that they're going to try and implement, that is going to be avoidable, but it depends how much you play into their hand. It's going to be that people are going to want to be near the things they think are cool, and they're going to think that freedom is going to be for them too. And they're going to feel like they're experiencing freedom because they're not going to realize that the people that they think are part of their freedom are actually part of their control, right? So they're going to love their servitude to On It. They're going to love their servitude to the Joe Rogan Experience.
That's what I'm getting. It feels like a trap given how many awake people, I'm not talking about Joe Rogan, but I'm talking about my own friends. Mickey and Elevate they moved their whole thing there. And I'm looking and I'm like, this feels like a trap because it feels like it's set up for them to be controlled and kind of like another MK pod to just take their creativity and their intelligence and fuck with it. It feels, I don't want this to be the case because I want my friends, of course, to be free, but my spidey sense is mm-mm.
Right. So they're going to go. So some of the things that are going to happen with this is marijuana is going to become legalized in Texas, which it's not right now. So people are going to think that's a step towards freedom, right?
Well, same with the push to legalize psilocybin feels like the worst idea. Now we're giving.
But I think this is going to be a place where psychedelics are going to be widely available because Aubrey and Joe and all of these people have put
Tim Ferriss.
They've all talked that. So I think that people are going to be satisfied to stay inside the dome if they think that they can, right, if they can do DMT all day.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's true. Like, you can travel anywhere when you're on DMT, right? But people are going to become, and I think that's been part, like, why does George Soros push to overthrow countries and to legalize marijuana? It's because he knows that when people are fucking stoned, they don't give a shit that they don't actually have real freedom, right?
Exactly.
So I have nothing against DMT or psilocybin or marijuana or whatever, but you do it where you want, when you want, how you want, outside of the scope of social pressure for that, right? Having a movement around these things, and this is one of the things I really hope to talk to your friend Robert about when he resurfaces, is the difference between personal use, guiding your own experiences with these things, and having your use be as part of like a group or a movement, because it changes the whole thing.
It changes the whole thing. And also right now, given how much popularity psychedelic therapy is getting, and I'm talking to people who are being injected with things that they would have normally taken in a more organic fashion, and they're being observed. Mm-hmm. It feels super creepy to me.
I can't think of a worse place to do mushrooms or DMT than in a doctor's office or a lab or like a place where you get kidney dialysis or something.
The lighting. Just think of the lighting. Yeah, it sounds good.
No, like for me, I need some rough elements to it, right? Whether that rough element be nature or a huge sound system and music or whatever. Like, I need there to be something about it that isn't calm, cool, and collected for it to have any real resonance for me, yeah. Right? So, yeah.
Definitely not clinical and sterile, for sure.
Like, the thing about, there's so much stuff to do in a very small area of Austin that there's going to be people who are happy to never leave that. And because in Austin, Town Lake, Zilker Park, Barton Springs, they're all right downtown. So nature is right there downtown. So people don't have this strong need like we have here to like go to the beach or go to the mountains or whatever. You can fucking watch the bats downtown on the bridge, right on Congress in Austin, right? So there's this feeling that everything is right here, right? Edwards Aquifer, all this stuff. I mean, there's a green belt around Austin, so like it's not going to be challenging to keep people within about a 30-mile radius, right? Kind of thing. And then there's going to be a second, like, smaller bubble in Round Rock, right? That's going to, so, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's really hard. So yeah, there's something not right about it, and at the same time, there is stuff there that's really fucking cool. It's a great place to go and eat and drink and hang out with your friends and hear music and all that kind of stuff and walk around the lake. It's really cool and whatever. But I'm telling you, dude, the trees have eyes there, and I don't mean, and I mean not just in the natural sense. I mean in the surveillance sense, but also in the extra paranormal sense. Right? Like not just the surveillance state technology, but like the weird esoteric occult, like this world isn't what we think it is. And, there really is are things watching you all the time besides just your own highest self, like that exists there. There's a lot to play with energetically there for everyone, right? Yeah. They certainly know that. So I think the Joe Rogan move there, everything has been set up for a really long period of time for him to come in there, right? Like all these things, all these people that you've talked about have lined up. Now he's there. It's kind of like, when whoever the first person who was like be a big rock star first moved to LA as opposed to being in the rock scene somewhere else or whatever. And then so they set it all up. They put all the necessary things in place in terms of like culture, technology, health, blah, 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 this and that kind of thing. And then he's coming there. And I'm telling you this, depending on how this plays out and goes, if he does end up doing this conversation with Donald Trump or this possible debate, which there's
no way they'll let Biden.
I see a couple of possibilities here. right? So I see there's no way Biden's doing it. So it'll either
it'll be like a Biden clone.
It'll be Kamala. They'll offer Kamala Harris, which is not Kamala Harris anymore. I'm sorry, but that thing that they're saying is Kamala Harris is Sandra Bernhardt in blackface. That is not Kamala Harris. Right?
Like Kamala Harris at all.
But I think the more likely thing is that the reps for the Biden Harris, or according to her, a Harris Biden campaign.
I love that she said that.
I think they're gonna say no and poo-poo it and say no. That's like that wouldn't be taking politics seriously, kind of thing. And I think one of the things what happened? Something just happened with my recording. That's weird.
Mine's fine, so I can send it to you.
Okay, that is weird. Why this keeps happening? I don't understand. This is like the third time this has happened to me. It's bizarre. Okay, I think I accidentally hit something, so you'll have to send whatever it is. Anyway, so I think what's going to happen is that either it just ends up a solo conversation with Trump, I don't know, or that
I don't think Joe will do it. I don't think they'll let him.
Brett Weinstein will offer to debate or to send in one of the representatives of 2020, and this will be the way that they move the Unity 2020 idea into the big time, right? And I'm not sure yet. Like I control.
Joe mentioned Unity 20. I'm not seeing it get any traction.
No, not at all. But all the things that Joe has proposed in the past are things they're talking about. Like I was just watching right before we got on, Brett talking with that annoying Asian girl, that Chen or whatever that we watched that time on the Joe Rogan.
Deborah So?
No, I love her. Melissa Chen.
Oh, wait, she's in the news right now. What is her?
The girl who you sent me the podcast to listen to that time, and it was like she was complete. Like she's like from Hong Kong or Singapore. You sent me the podcast. She was on like 6 months ago with Joe, or 8 months ago.
What was she talking about? Was it the trans thing?
No, not that. Like the stuff that, like more like the China United States issues.
Okay.
So just before we got on, I was listening to Brett Weinstein talk to Matt Taibbi and Melissa Chen, floating the idea of a Tulsi Gabbard, Dan Crenshaw ticket, because that's who the Unity 2020 people that they had paneled had chosen as the best.
I did send in Tulsi. I did fill out the Unity 2020 survey.
But also, Tulsi Gabbard, human potential. That's the
really part of that movement.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem with Tulsi, A, is she doesn't know dick about China, but B, the fact that she gave Biden, like that was where she lost me. Similarly to Bernie going after the Democratic ticket, when she gave her approval to Biden, I was like, okay, you lost me. That's not leadership.
Like, I don't understand how. So when I listened to the podcast where Brett and Eric laid out his vision for Unity 2020, and Eric tried to tell him alternately how stupid of an idea this was and how he also thinks it's a good idea. Because he just
like sub-dom together.
He loves to like tell Brett he's stupid, but then also like, whatever, right? So all the people that Brett was proposed, as he's laying this idea out for the first time, and he's proposing Andrew Yang, General McRaven, but it's the same thing if you propose Tulsi and Dan Crenshaw, right? The answer to corruption cannot be somebody who rolled over and endorsed the people who suppressed them in the first place and who has dementia also, paired with somebody in McRaven who pulled off, one of the biggest hoaxes or false flags in histories and then killed the entire SEAL team to cover it up.
Right.
Like this is how we end corruption. Right. So it's hilarious to me. Right. So like it's the same, all the people that they keep presenting forward are people that have these contradictions. Right. They haven't proposed a clean character yet.
No, but this points to what you and I had kind of touched on last week, where it was like, wait a minute, why would Heather and Brett, after being attacked by an angry mob in Olympia because of this racism stuff, why would they move to Portland to be in the center of more of that, which only builds out the narrative of they're not free, they're working for someone.
So the longer I look at this, the more I think that Evergreen was a setup, right? That Evergreen was it was a setup, and that right now this like fake in my opinion, fake banning of the Unity 2020 on Twitter is part of the setup, right?
Wait,
That
they
would be
were
the reason.
banned on Twitter?
Apparently, Brett Weinstein was on Tucker Carlson or someone else the other day talking about it.
Why?
So, yeah, it doesn't make any sense because Twitter's saying because they had bots working for them. But so I guess Brett waited 2 weeks. Apparently, they were banned. Brett waited 2 weeks and investigated and couldn't find any evidence, and then went on Tucker Carlson to say so, right? And so I think
Jack
that, like,
Dorsey given him a statement? I mean, he's buddy with Jack Dorsey. P.S. Did you hear Joe Rogan saying that we need to give Jack Dorsey a break?
yeah, I know. Yeah,
We'll save it for the patrons hour, but whoa.
right. So I think that, here's the set, like one of the things that Joe talked about, we're going to talk a little bit about the Joe Rogan show in the patrons hour, but he talked a lot about how Joe doesn't like all the censoring and the banning, right? Like, apparently, even though he's allowed Spotify to censor and ban, and he
wants to give Jack Dorsey a break, who's the king of censoring.
Well, and he gave me a copyright strike when we used a small clip from his show to talk about him, right? So I got a copyright strike for that, even though he complains about getting copyright strikes from YouTube when he uses clips, which is why he says he's going to Spotify, who then also sends, it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense, right? But I think that this is the path for, like, I think the next time we see Brett, I think we're going to see a Unity 2020 kind of thing on the Joe Rogan podcast at some time. And it's going to be, well, these people have been censored, right? The third party.
That allegedly, that's why he faked being censored. Cancel, clear, delete. I don't know. But it seems to give him more legitimacy if Unity 2020 was censored. It gives them an edge because I didn't see them really getting any traction. I didn't see it going anywhere.
They don't. Twitter censors a lot of stuff. They don't censor third-party stuff. I've seen they censor conservatives more than third-party. You still see libertarians and Green Party. I mean, they censor everything. I'm not saying that they don't censor, right? But, like, the last election and the election before that, there was, like, lots of Green Party, Libertarian Party, people talks of, like RT used to host debates between the third parties. They promoted that on Twitter. No, it's gotten worse. I understand that. But there's nothing so far that is threatening about the Unity 2020 thing. No, but they want people to think that this is a controversial idea, right? But here's the kind of setup is like, the young people are going to say, why won't Joe Biden go on Joe Rogan? Well, Joe Biden won't, but these Unity 2020 people are. Unity 2020 is the complete thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's the problem, reaction, solution. It's the merging of libertarianism and socialism, right? Like, that's what they're going for with this. This is basically the way you get people to agree, instead of to a third party, to merge the two parties into one, and you end up with a one-party system like China. And the people are going to think it's a great idea, and they love it because it's hip and it's cool, and the people who are doing it have big muscles and wear good shoes and, whatever, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, honestly, and even before, like, Heather decided to ignore us and we watched Brett, like, do his weird, like, whatever that was. But even before that, I thought it was a really stupid idea to have this sort of, like, pinky swear, like, blood brother pact, like, oh, we're just gonna switch places after 4 years. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. If they're corrupt and shitty and ineffective, then we're, like, stuck with this part. It's the worst idea.
It's the worst idea, and it's taking, like, okay, so you have the worst representative of progressivism or quasi-socialism in someone like George Soros, who's going to be the funder of whatever this is.
He funds the Weinsteins.
The worst version of libertarianism, which is Peter Thiel, who has Palantir that spies on everybody and tries to predict what they're going to do and buy and blah, 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 right? So it's like basically merging fascism and communism, right, kind of thing into this thing, but there's going to be cool people doing it. And it's going to be legit because this is, like, Brett was, Brett is the person who's fighting against cancel culture, right? And that's the story, right?
And every email I get from them, they sign off like see you later, patriots. Like, they've really co-opted that term
They have reimagined. That's the word they use for everything is we reimagine. Everything is either evolutionary or reimagined.
Yes, they've reimagined that term. I
They've
mean,
evolution. They've evolved. They've reimagined evolution and evolved, reimagined. All this kind of stuff, right? But here's the big get. Jeff and I were looking some stuff up the other day, and their symbol for unity is a broken circle. How can you have unity if the circle is broken? So it's right there in your face.
It's probably like the Tibetan flag, which has one side undefined because it's like open borders. And I haven't seen it, but that was the first thing that popped into mind, was to sort of like mirror that.
It's on there. So the other thing, let me say the other thing that's weird, and then I'll go into trying to find it. When you try and look up anything about unity, it's hard to find, because what you find is there's a new software that creates video games that's called Unity 2020, which tells me that this is a simulated game theory political movement that they're creating. So it's just like how BLM stands for both Bureau of Land Management and Black Lives Matter. It's right, like when you have these these acronyms that stand for two different things, that's like weird, right? Like there was all that shit going on with BLM because of the Bundy Ranch stuff, and then suddenly we get Black Lives Matter, which co-ops, whenever someone looks up BLM, they find Black Lives Matter. They don't find the fact that we have a corrupt land management agency, right? So here's this weird thing where like they have a political party that's calling its big thing Unity 2020, right? And then when I go and look up anything about Unity 2020, I'm just going to show you what I get. It's all this stuff. And then Jeff did some digging with some of his blockchain friends into this Unity 2020 stuff. And apparently it's like a game creating software that helps. Okay, so look at this. I'm going to screen share with you, right? Like, okay. And they're using some of the same ideas in the campaign right? So look at this. This is the images for this software that
who's funding this software?
I don't know. I'll have to talk some more with Jeff about it. He just did a deep dive on this yesterday.
I wonder if it's a Peter Thiel thing.
Right. So it certainly possibly is, or some Incutel kind of stuff or whatever, right? So this is what you find. You cannot find anything on the political party.
Did you see the Whitney Webb video I sent you, by the way?
I don't know if I've seen one that you've sent me. I like Whitney Webb.
It's because they're talking about Incutel. I didn't mean to interrupt our podcast. We can talk about that later.
Okay, Whitney Webb is good. I like Whitney. But there's nothing about the political party here, except for right here. About 50 or 60 things down, there's this.
They're not getting any traction. It's not going. It's pretty late in the game. We're in September. They're going to really get this. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they have Soros behind them.
This is their symbol. This is their Articles of Unity symbol. And see how it's a broken circle.
I guarantee they're pulling that from the Tibetan flag. I guarantee it.
Which we'll get into the other thing that you wanted to talk about, which was the yoga teachers against Q in just a second, right?
Do we have time for that? Do we even care?
We can talk about it. It's fine. I'm good. I'm not in a rush.
Okay.
Okay. So there's almost nothing about unity here, right? Even though they're having a lot of high celebrity-ish kind of people come on and talk about it, right? Matt Taibbi.
It's such a fakakta idea. Why can't they just start a viable third party instead of this trade-off ridiculousness?
But look at all this.
What it does is it guarantees 8 years of leadership.
Look at what this is, okay? So first of all, we have like a cube, and it's like a peace sign and a cube and whatever, right? But their software, roadmap, recap, state of unity, workflow, and creation, right? So one of the things that Jeff sent me a link on that this GameFlow software does allows you to create games that have workflow and upgrade to quality of life, right? Like it's part of
transhumanism shit.
So it's basically like, it feels to me, and one of the things that like Peter Thiel does, who's friends with Eric Weinstein and friends with all that stuff,
Eric works for Peter Thiel.
They game stuff, right? They use game theory in deciding how to apply some of their, technologies and stuff like this. I feel like they're sort of this is all about the software, but it sounds like it could be a political plan. Unity 2020 game development. This is our game plan, right? So I feel like
the key is to look into who's funding the game.
They're marking this out in the virtual space, right? They're marking this out, but one of the key components.
Also keep in mind that they're evolutionary biologists.
Right, and they reimagine things, which is also part of video game creation, right? And so there's interesting. There's something Unity 2020 that looks like a Tibetan monk. That's kind of interesting, and that's the video game. All right, but it's about workflow and quality of life upgrades. That's going to be something that they promise with this synthesis, that it's going to help smooth out our like world and our politics and stuff like that, and then everybody's going to have an upgrade to their quality of life. Right now, it's not necessarily going to be an upgrade of the kind that you and I might want, but it would include UBI. It would include
vaccinations and microchips, because they're completely on that bandwagon, which makes no sense if they're legit evolutionary biologists.
People all really like Elon Musk, and they think the things he's doing are interesting and blah, blah, blah. Right? So it's just, but I mean, I think this is what's happening with this thing. It's like, this is going to be the party. This is going to be like the sort of like trick into the transhumanist future through this idea of using common sense to bring people together by like taking, equally compromised people from both sides and having them come to compromises.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that's kind of the deal with that. Do we have that's sort of, how did we get into that again?
I have no idea.
I don't even remember. Okay. It did bring up the interesting thing. Did you want to talk about the yoga teachers against Q?
I mean, I don't even know what to say about it, except it's an instance where it's just so outlandish that I'm like, I've got nothing. I don't even know what to say to these people. So an article came out in the New York Times last week by this guy who, Amazing Polly, did a really good analysis, and she's been tracking this journalist who apparently is like disinformation agent A#1 over at the New York Times. And he was taking down Q as an alt-right Nazi terrorist group. And the way that they do it, of course, is to make it super silly and say that they're like an elite cannibal ring. Like they just make it super crazy. So I'd heard about it through Amazing Polly. I'm obviously not reading the New York Times anymore. But then yesterday I saw this post by some like, hotshot yoga teacher saying like, yay, Sean Korn and Hala Corey and all these like famous yoga teachers who apparently had something to do with the article. And I don't know if it was just they were lobbying the New York Times to publish it or if they were mentioning it. I don't really know. But the gist was,
what was the article about?
The article was about Q.
Okay.
And about Q is a terrorist, an alt-right terrorist movement that has to be stopped. And all these yoga teachers apparently banded together because they saw that other yoga teachers and people in their community had started to reference Q, and they needed to stop them.
Okay. So if you like yoga, you can't also think that anything that Q says is true.
If you like yoga, apparently you have to believe every single thing all the other people who like yoga believe. Otherwise, they're concerned about you. And this is kind of a weird thing that I've noticed is, what is the concern? That people think differently or they're going to be eaten by monsters for having these beliefs? I'm not really clear. So it was just this post about like, yay, yoga teachers, and kind of banding together to like get the other people who had thought they believed in, it's not a movement. I mean, whatever it was, but they need to save people from this horrible terrorist group that is Q. And it was just crazy. And I tagged you on the thread because I couldn't believe that it was real.
I went and looked at the thread, and it was actually like, maybe I'll put the link to the thread in the show description because it's amusing. Like it's super amusing. But there's a reason why the yoga community, in my opinion, would be drafted to do something like this. And it's because there are so many people in the yoga community who've had sex scandals. And so far, they've mostly been about like, the gurus who have like yoga conference getaways, having sex with multiple of their students and blah, 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 all that kind of crap. But you and I both know that like, there's probably something weirder and deeper underneath that, right? And the spiritual communities have been infiltrated with the same corruption and the same pedophilia that Hollywood and athletics and all that other kind of stuff has been, right? And so these high-end yoga people, whether they're involved or not, do not want to lose their place on the ladder of social importance. And so they're going to step out there and defend, right? They're going to defend their elite of their communities from, you know.
We forgot the craziest part of the thread, which was they said that Q was behind pandemic.
The funniest part, guys, of the thread is that it seemed to imply that Q wrote the pandemic. They
said behind, so it wasn't clear if it was like behind by way of funding or behind. The greatest thing about the thread is they clearly don't know what Q is.
Right.
They have never researched what Q is, but Q is behind pandemic.
So are you right now on the computer that you wrote your parts of pandemic on?
Yes.
Can you just scoot over a little bit so I can see if Q is behind you?
Q's under the desk. She's under the desk right now. What interested me the most about it was like, they're taking it so seriously. They're so sure that they're right. And I get it. I'm so sure that I'm right sometimes on some things. But the big glaring piece that was missing from the whole thread that they're taking it so seriously is that no one's looked into what Q is. No one knows what Q is. No one has no one has done any research. They've taken what the New York Times has completely lied and completely like turned the concept of Q into like a distorted, retarded pretzel, and they've swallowed it hook, line, and sinker, and now are carrying that as like their mantle, their big noble mission is to save people from Q.
They're backing up their concern for people who can't think for themselves with not thinking for themselves. And what's the funniest thing, the funniest part to me is they said that the evidence that Q is behind pandemic is the fact that the term dem is highlighted in red in the title of pandemic. So they used, in an attempt to disprove Q, the same kind of coding that they accused Q of using when they...
Yeah, but they don't even know that Q uses coded language because they don't even know what... Yeah, I mean, it was so silly.
It was so silly.
It was totally silly and ridiculous.
I listened to this right before we started, so I haven't had a chance to fully enjoy the thread yet. So I'm going to get some popcorn when we're done and read the rest of the thing. But you'll be excited to know, Danny, that next week I'm interviewing the person who I believe to be the most esoteric research on anything Q for my show.
Oh, rad. I'm so excited.
So, because if I'm gonna go there, I'm only gonna do it that way. I don't care about the Hollywood baby eating aspect of it or any of that. I just want to.
That's not all of Q. That's a tiny piece.
No, but
no one said they eat babies. They said they drink adrenochrome.
Right, but my point is that whenever somebody who believes in Q, right, not you, but whenever most people who believe in Q share something with me that I have got to read because it's going to change the world, it's always the dumb forward-facing Hollywood shit. Right, that is designed to make possible the thing you just talked about.
Right.
Right. So this is a completely different take on what Q is and why it exists and whatnot. So I'm it will definitely be an interesting show. So
yeah, I'm excited to tune into that.
So looking forward to that. But also, when I was doing some research for something else over the weekend, I did, and also some of the Whitney Webb stuff. It is interesting that there's a great big Q in Incutel. Right? It's literally IN-Q-tel. So there may be a clue there as to where some of this Q stuff comes from, and it's that place that I was afraid that it comes from. But that they oftentimes launch an operation on top of something else because there's something else going on. So we'll see. I'm excited to talk about this guy. It should be a really interesting show. Anywho, we're going to wrap it up now. For people who didn't know what we were going to talk about, we sure found a lot to talk about. That's a cute face. I like it. We're going to move over to Afterwards, and you'll be able to find that either on my Patreon or Danny's. And it's just because it's not that I think we'd get censored for the content, but there's certain content that we want to protect for now, and maybe we'll speak about publicly later. But we want to get it on. Yes, we're strategizing here. We have a strategy. And so it's not like world-changing information. It's just a line of thought I'm going to. Huh?
It's
what?
That it's world changing, but no, it isn't. But you guys will love it. So check out our Patreon because this is what we actually were stoked to talk about today.
Yeah, so we'll see you over there on my Patreon or Danny's. I'll link to them both in the description here, and we'll be back in a couple weeks more. Any offerings for the people? Anything special going on that they should know before we go from the public part?
The usual.
The usual. We'll see you next time, guys. Okay, stop.